All right, so when we decided to start formulating ideas about what we'd like to do our project on, what was really at the forefront of our mind is enacting Praxis. And so we've titled our project Praxis Through Pages, and what we're going to be doing is a Black Student Union book drive. Um, so before we get into our project specifically, I'd like to go over a little bit more broadly about what Praxis is. So Praxis is the combination of theory and action. That is what Praxis is, and it's something that a lot of Marxists use in their literature. But we've really decided to use it based on this quote by Antonio Gramsci. He says, "The philosophy of praxis does not aim at the peaceful resolution of existing contradictions. It is not the instrument of government of the dominant groups in order to gain the consent of and exercise hegemony over the subaltern classes, lower classes, oppressed. It is the expression of these subaltern classes who want to educate themselves in the art of government and who have an interest in knowing all truths, even the unpleasant ones, and in avoiding the impossible deceptions of their upper class and even more their own." And so what he's really saying here is that there are the oppressed and the oppressors, and it's not really the job of the oppressed to deal with the oppressor's government. It's really more about educating themselves and the government to try to change it. And so it's not up to the people on top, who orchestrate the hegemony. It's really about the people who are being oppressed and their rise up. And so that's really where we gain the inspiration from this project.
So, is it my slide now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so as far as the action we've taken so far, we're basically going to be putting donation boxes around town at 3 different bookstores that have all agreed to have donation boxes. And then also hopefully the university library will have a donation box, and then potentially other areas throughout campus.
The branch center outside the branch center outside the Black Student Union room as well.
Yeah, and that's where the actual library is. And basically, we'll be putting out flyers on campus and throughout town, announcements on the college radio, and social media announcements as well, probably mainly through Facebook, in order to, I guess, show the public what's going on, and have people know where donation boxes are, and then they could donate books to these certain drop-off locations with these boxes. And we'll be accepting both fiction and nonfiction books by different Black authors, all centering around race relations, Afrocentrism, Pan-Africanism, anti-racism, history of white supremacy, really anything that can aid the Black Student Union in what they do. And then the last part about it, which I think is really important, is that we will be curating, just like looking through the books at the end with the Black Student Union to determine what is effective for their library, and if there's any books with problematic language or narratives, then we'll be discussing or just not discussing whether to include those or not. And next slide. So our rationale behind this project, like Rachel was saying, is kind of about praxis and about how through knowledge you can, or I guess through books you can gain knowledge, and you can act in an informed way with that knowledge. So we all really drew on the books that we read in order to, I guess, make this project happen. So the books I read, first one was Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And in that book, he talks so much about how literature and books, and the library at Howard University acted as sort of like a sanctuary for him, and he would read tons and tons and tons of books, constantly learning about history, about the African continent before colonization and before slavery, and just all of these books and all this information that he got from this library that have now informed his way of thinking and how he writes now. So books were the main influence for him in doing the work that he does now. So that was really important for me to apply to this project. And then also, as you guys heard last week with Irving's Waking Up White, there were two things from that. One is that narrative drives belief systems. So if we can get books for the Black Student Union and for the public to read that actively combat the, I guess, made-up narratives that have been perpetuated throughout, the last hundreds of years, then we can be doing some sort of service. And then also the idea of a white ally as a supporter and not a leader of a movement. And by doing this book drive, really, we're, I guess, supporting the Black Student Union by just gathering supplies for them to use in what way they think is best. And then, do you guys want to talk about the books that you...
So we also kind of drew on what Peggy Kerr talked about when she presented on the Aryan nations and talked about how their pamphlets circulating were such a way of garnering support for their movement, and we thought we could flip that. So we're going to obviously be advertising the book drive, and that's something we really wanted to focus on was how we advertise. So we're going to have radio advertisements and then flyers too. So we kind of thought about how we could flip that for a better narrative. And then for the books I read, so I already presented on James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, and in his book he talked a lot about there haven't been productive social conversations about race, and we've talked about in class also how white people tend to view racism as just like a social issue, like if we all get along, everything will be fine, and he addresses that we need to talk a lot more about the oppressive powers of racism and how they're institutionalized. And then next week I'm going to present on the new Jim Crow, and Michelle Alexander talks about that in her book too, that there's a lack of conversation about racism in not only academic spaces, but academic literature, and that's something we also wanted to culminate in the book drive as a collection of this kind of literature. So personal narrative as well as scholarly narratives, or reports rather.
In the book that I've read, Beyond the Pale by Bron Ware, she definitely outlines or examples of helpful white activists, and most of the examples that were least problematic were women who gathered materials and then dispersed them to the public. Kind of what we're doing here is gathering research materials and then dispersing them instead of kind of having our own commentary on how those materials should be used.
And then the last one there is Bell Hooks' Killing Rage. In, I believe it's the foreword of that book, she talks about this concept of race talk and how actually talking about race is one of the most important ways to combat racism. And so I think that providing, adding to the Black Student Union Library provides them with a lexicon that they can use to have this race talk in an academic way.
So in the social action topography, we fall in the upper right quadrant because it's public, because we're asking the community to come out and donate books. It's definitely a collective action because it's many people participating in it. But what I think is interesting about our project is that once it's actually finished, a lot of the benefits of it are going to be individual and private. So although our project's up there, the benefits are going to be kind of mirroring it.
All right, and so getting to the main point of why we're even doing this project is definitely like, how is this going to challenge white supremacy? And so we've kind of based our project on similar ideas on like women's libraries. And so there's one in London, and in some of their literature, they've said that the bureaucracy of large institutions like libraries presents like an environment in which white men already isn't able to move around and navigate very well, but oppressed populations like women aren't necessarily allowed to do that. And so we're kind of mirroring that thought process with race relations. So I said that critical race theory is at odds with large institutions because they have historical racism built into them. Historically, white men have operated them. And so the Black Student Union Library is going to provide an environment where that can be challenged as well, not only by reading that literature, but also talking about it with other people who are in that library, in that center, as well as providing cultural, social capital.
And so obviously like a big part of projects are crafting goals. So we had 5 in mind. So of course we want to increase the size of the Black Student Union Library. It's something that just started and we thought it pertained really well to this class. We wanted to be able to circulate literature. We wanted to increase campus access to literature about race. Obviously we're in a very white dominated space here, and we wanted to be able to uplift opportunities to circulate more diverse literature. And then always like contributing to more exposure than the BSU already has is always a good thing. And also like their headquarters at the branch center are new. This library is really new. We wanted to publicize that as much as possible. And number 2 and 4 are kind of related, literature-based knowledge on the topic of race, increasing this, or developing on this space for academic conversation surrounding race as well as personal narrative-based conversation. And then increasing availability of literature for theory portion of Praxis. And also with projects come possible risks. So the big things we were thinking of was like defacing of the donation bins, and also the donation of white supremacy or white supremacist literature, things that are against our goals, that go against our standards for this project and for the BSU. So we're going to have the bins in supervised areas. We've discussed this with the people that are going to be helping us with the donations. And then, like one of my co-presenters mentioned earlier, we're going to be going through the literature that we receive alongside the BSU so we can figure out how to best support the library and how to best improve it and expand it. And also one of the big things we thought about was, well, what if we do get these hateful materials? Like, what do we do? Do we just ignore it? And that's another theme that I know has come up in this class is, when do you say something and when do you kind of maybe let it slide? And that's a big conversation too, just in our society right now. And we kind of drew on how one of the posters for this class was reproduced with a much more hateful message, and we thought, okay, what did people do? They shared it on social media and they said, this is what's happening here and here's why it's wrong. So that's what we intend to do, is publicize the literature that's been given to us and talk about why, or where it came from, or where it was donated to, and why it's problematic and why we want to address that.
So as far as implementation goes, we have a very good head start here. We've talked to the director of the branch center and the Black Student Union about the drive, and we have both are in support of it. Any issues that arise, we can be in communication with those people and figure out stuff from there. And then we've also secured the support of 3 local bookstores, and they've all agreed to have donation boxes there, as well as look through their libraries and see if they have any relevant materials that they'd be willing to donate. And we've decided on the dates, so it's going to be during Dead Week and Finals Week, which I think will be beneficial to us because people in African American Studies courses as well as history courses who aren't necessarily using their books at the end of the year possibly donate them to the book drive. We still have to make our posters. which we are in the middle of doing right now. Make a Facebook event page and start sharing that on social media, and also make a radio announcement. We have to make and give donation boxes to our collaborators, and then at the end of the project, we have to evaluate our success with our collaborators, mostly the BSU. And now it's time for discussion. Do you guys have any broad concerns about this project? Yes.
I'm kind of curious, in terms of the literature that you guys receive that is in support of white supremacy, has there been any discussion about keeping that and possibly putting it in a section as evidence, or is that something that you don't want to have associated at all, as it could possibly motivate somebody going to the library for resources?
I think that that's something that the Black Student Union, we will decide with them, and it might be like a case-by-case basis. I'm kind of hoping that nobody donates white supremacist material, and that is an option. But if it does happen, I think using it as a teaching opportunity is more proactive as opposed to just throwing it away. I think it just kind of depends on what the material is. If it's an actually published book that has white supremacist ideas in it, it might be a good idea to keep that book as an example of hateful material, because it's always good to know what the other side is thinking. If it's just outside the prurient interest and just gross, then I think the discussion of documenting what has been received, making sure that the proper channels are told about the fact that we received that, and then disposing of it in a good way would probably be the action we'd take.
So one thing you may want to consider if you do, and I hope you don't, but if you do get contributions of supremacist literature, is to document it with the Montana Human Rights Network, just so they know that that's happening, because that's part of what they do.
And I think campus security should also be alerted if that happens, just because that's something that I think they should be aware of. Just because having it documented.
Can you tell us more about the nature of your conversations with the BSU and how you've negotiated your roles as outsiders to that organization?
I think that we've definitely decided like our main rules for this are implementation of a project that we can carry out, and then distributors. I think obviously that's the biggest focus, is doing something to help another organization, not making it not solely our project that we're doing, but a collaborative effort with an organization that has a broader goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we've tried to be as flexible as possible with plans, and whatever is most going to benefit the BSU is what we want to do. But you were about to say something.
Yeah, and I can speak to it a little bit because I've talked with you guys about the book drive, and we've had previous conversations about starting like a bookshelf or stuff, like a book drive of sorts, just within our house. And so, you know, when you guys approached me about the idea of doing something in the Branch Center, the fact that it can be facilitated through the Branch Center and through SIN, it kind of worked out really well, because it was an idea that we had kind of had on the back burner for a while there.
Why books? Why not movies?
Because I've never heard of a movie drive before. I don't think outside the box. But yeah, I think that's mostly why.
Did you just mean to pun? It was a great pun if you did. You don't think outside the box.
Yeah.
Yes, I meant to do it. Yes.
Good job.
How well do you guys think that our project will address the goal of resisting white supremacy?
I think you made a point. You said, to know about the other side, right? And I strongly believe that. I think that in order to dismantle a system or dismantle something, you have to know your enemy and know and understand that system. And what better way to know about it than to read about it and educate yourself about it?
Yeah, I think I had a conversation a few days ago with one of my peers just about recognizing that something is wrong, that something isn't right, feeling frustrated and discontented, but not always knowing the reason why, or not being able to explain why you feel that way. And we were just discussing how important education is and being able to read and further your knowledge and your thought process. And I think one key aspect of this class that this group is highlighting here is the fact of reading literature by well-researched and well-publicized authors who've spent lots and lots of time trying to figure out white supremacy and dismantling racism. And so I think that this will be a great asset for people to be able to kind of tap into and start that academic conversation like you guys kept bringing up. So I think that there's a lot of potential here in terms of educating and furthering the conversation.
I love that point, especially because Antonio Gramsci, his whole thing, like who he thinks will produce social change is organic intellectuals, and who they are people who, like from that background who gain the knowledge and then use that to kind of dismantle hegemony, and that's exactly what his point was.
So if anybody has any other ideas about how we could further publicize the book drive, we love suggestions. If you guys think we aren't thinking of enough things, if there's something obvious we're missing, we love feedback on that also.
I have 2 thoughts about that. I don't know if I missed this. Are you doing anything on Facebook or like social media? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that pops into my head, I don't really know how I feel about this, but like, so in my program, we have like second years and first years, and there's a lot of like competition. So we did a competition about like things for the pod and stuff like that. So I wonder if there's like, I would be more than happy to, use the competitive spirit in my program to like help you guys. And I wonder if there are like also other things on campus. I mean, I don't know, the competition thing, I guess, is a whole different but maybe that's a way to like get people to do
Thinking of a way that we could integrate that into it is like the competition for that would be like donate your books to your favorite bookstore, just because I wonder how we would record where the donations came from.
Yeah.
I think would be the only difficult part there.
Yeah.
How are you like creating book boxes so that people understand what type of books to donate?
Mm-hmm.
Like how is somebody going to come in and kind of know what they want?
That is actually a really good question that I don't think we had considered yet. But I think if we if we do just a card that says Black Student Union Book Drive for U of M, and then maybe we can print off a bunch of covers of books that we're interested in. I think that if you stick Alice Walker on the front, people will kind of know what we're going for.
Well, and beyond that too, like having flyers that we're having made distributed to the places that we're gonna give book boxes to, so that general information is there too.
Yeah, maybe like a little description of like just the types of books, like anti-racism, history of white supremacy, Pan-Africanist books, whatever it might be. And just like add the little donation box. Sorry, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. But
No, we're laughing because you're frozen on the screen.
I'm still here.
Okay, sure, man.
Is that?
Oh, there you go. Megan.
But you had a follow-up on that?
You could also put like a list of books that you want or something. I mean, I guess that might be hard because somebody might give you like 10 of whatever.
I think that that's not a bad idea, especially because if there was a large enough amount of repeats, like I'm probably going to donate some books that I have left over from Tobin's classes that I've taken in the past. And then if there's enough of those, then in the future he can say, if you don't have time to buy this book right away, go to the Black Student Union. They might have a copy that you can borrow and use. So I think that that's definitely not a bad idea.
Just as an example that you could use to show what kind of books you want. I know that some larger bookstores, I'm not going to name names, but like they have those displays of like, you know, if you like this, read this.
Mhm.
Maybe talk to the bookstores that you talk to see if they can maybe set up displays of books that they already have, not necessarily ones that they're going to donate, but ones that are along the lines of what you want, because then it also gives the option of people who are in line to buy stuff.
Yeah.
The, you know, donation bins right there. If there's a set of books that are, you know, tied to that, they can be like, oh, it's only, you know, $6 or whatever. I'll just put it, I'll buy it and donate it.
That's a really great idea, and I think the bookstores that we're working with would love that because it encourages people to buy a book.
It's a
So,
win-win for them.
yeah, exactly.
Is that recording us?
Yes, it is recording us.
All right, so have you guys thought about like how this project could potentially be long-term? Because as the head of the BSU sitting behind me has already stated that it's been on the BSU's like mind for a while. And I do feel like this could possibly be used, like this whole project could still be used by them years down the road, a few months down the road. Like I just feel like it has a certain amount of longevity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that about our project a lot. The fact that it doesn't have to be just one time. I think that's kind of up to the BSU. If they want to do it again, I think it could be something that's viable to do once a semester even. Just because I think that's how often students are buying new books and then they don't need them anymore. And plus it's a really great way to have people think about the Black Student Union. I think a lot of the times people on campus don't even realize that that's a resource that we have here. So yeah, I think that just is entirely up to what they want to do with it in the future.
So I have one suggestion, then I'm going to play the devil's advocate with you a little bit. So my one suggestion is to be more deliberate about your advertising strategy on campus, perhaps by working with the Office of Communications that can also get perhaps some press release out to the larger community as a whole. I think they'll be very interested in this kind of, very positive project, student-initiated, the fact that it's tied to this class. I'd encourage you to think a little bigger about your publicity strategy. To try to be really proactive to let people know about this.
We didn't intend on doing that.
Sorry.
That's all right. As well as reaching out to departments and talking to professors within departments and having them get the word out as well. So yeah, that's definitely.
I'll play devil's advocate after your question.
Yeah. And just to further the idea of places to advertise, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but if you take your flyers to the Residence Life office, now housing office, and have them approved, they will distribute them to be hung up indoors. So you guys can't do it individually, but if you go to them, they'll do it for you. So as another space for advertising.
And what was the name of?
ShipX. If you go to ShipX and give them 3 copies, they'll hang it in the copy for you.
You have an office.
Okay.
Oh, the mall too. We'll get one up for you.
Come on.
So here's my first I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's just another idea about advertising is using social media to create a hashtag, like hashtag BSU Drive. So that way other people can also search that information and like if people hashtag that book titles and they're interested in reading them, they might just. It was coming from I read the book Charleston Syllabus, and that's how they were so successful in getting all the titles that they read.
Does the BSU have social media like Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah, we have a private Facebook page and an Instagram that is more or less used.
Oh, don't lie.
I have a question for you guys. What do you think is a good way to address more of like an older audience? Because like older people aren't necessarily on social media, and I think in like Missoula, there's probably a lot of middle-aged to older people that have books like this that would be beneficial. Just a lot of like, yeah, I don't know, how would we reach them?
Yeah, I feel like it might be helpful to do like outreach with churches, especially because they're very, very charitable, and typically the demographic is older.
Missoula Aging Services.
Have you looked at like different cafes? Because I know the cafe that I work at has a community board as well as a generally older population that comes in a lot, right by campus on Helen. Yeah, there's a community board there, and I'm sure if you talk to the owner, you might be able to work. I mean, people just go and put stuff up there, but if you look at maybe cafes and things that have this community board, so you, because I think Cafe Dolce has one too, and that might be a way to kind of get to the older population.
Yeah, I think we were planning on doing that anyway. Just, yeah, no, that's a good point though. Targeting like older, like Buttercup as, yeah.
So here's a risk that I hadn't thought of before, and also kind of a question, but what if our advertising gets defaced or vandalized? Because, was kind of what happened for the advertising for this class. How should we respond to that, or should we respond to it, and how can we keep track of if it's even happening?
I would, if it were me, I would respond to that in a very public way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how exactly you would do that, but.
And I know, I know that it also probably depends on where you put the signage, because the Buttercup has a very visible, like, my Missoula includes Muslims, and so that's a great word. So I think that kind of communicating with the owner and see what they're willing as well can be really helpful, because and like what they feel you guys communicate with them.
Based off the experience of one of my friends is on a team that's running for ASUM President Vice President, and when they set up all of their signage, they made a map of it, which could be really, really expensive if you're doing it in the community. But not necessarily like, oh my gosh, I have to go every single day and check in on sign number 63, but we all live here in Missoula, and so just making our way around to check on those on occasion.
Put your hand up. First up here at the table.
Oh, I was just gonna offer, the church idea was the first thing that popped into my head too when the person on the screen asked the question. And so I'm currently working with a couple congregations in town that I think would like be totally on top of this, so I can like intro you guys over email so you have someone there to talk to.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to play
What do you guys
devil's
think?
advocate now? Or sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Eli. Go ahead.
Whoops.
No, I didn't think. But what do you guys think about letters to the editor that like at like the Missoulian or something that might say something about the book drive? I don't know how that would work at all, but yeah, go for it.
You could do that, but if you make a press release, I'm sure they'd probably, well, I'm not sure, but I would guess they would run an article or something.
It's possible, yeah.
Good point.
If you can get it done through the communications office,
Yeah.
That'll give it even more credibility.
Mm-hmm.
All right, devil's advocate time. So I want you to imagine someone who sees a sign for your drive, notes that you're asking for books just from Black authors, and comes up to the owner of a bookstore in town, say, whatever, let's pick one out, the Thin Air Fact and Fiction, whatever, Shakespeare and Company, and says, you are being racist. You are participating in a project that is just asking for books from one group, one racial group. How will you respond when the bookstore owner comes to you rather flustered and not knowing what to do?
Well, I think, first of all, that's a punctuation error that we should address in that it's not necessarily only black authors, it's black authors, comma, and just books about race relations. And so not necessarily only black authors,
Okay.
yeah. And
All right, I'll amend my devil's advocate. What happens when someone says, oh, look, you're specifically just asking for books from black authors, and it's clear you have an agenda here because you're just trying to pursue that lefty, commie sort of rhetoric coming out of UM that we all know is what those professors are up to anyhow. And they're just a bunch of students who have been brainwashed into thinking that this is the way to move forward. Why aren't you asking for a diversity of perspectives on how race should be addressed in our country? How do you respond when the owner of the bookstore comes to you flustered because they don't know how to answer that question?
I think that, obviously we would want to restate the mission, why we're choosing this kind of literature to support a BSU library and give that statement back to the owner. And I mean, that's kind of the nature of running a project like this, is if a bookstore decides, hey, these people are saying all of this stuff about us, or this one person, and it makes us really uncomfortable as storefront owners, I think that's kind of the harsh reality, is it is kind of their right to pull out of their involvement with us.
But you're not going to try to convince them that they shouldn't pull out?
I would definitely try to convince them and say, sorry you had to deal with that.
Of course.
Yeah.
And then again, reinstating the purpose of our project and why it's important and why we want to be specific and intentional with the kind of literature that's coming in. And that it's not exclusionary just because it's specific.
And luckily, I think the bookstores that we're working with are pretty excited about this, from what I've heard about your communications with them. And also, I think that they have the kind of, the people who shop at those bookstores, I think very few of them are likely to have those kind of views. And if they do have those kind of views, I think that the employees and owners of those bookstores are prepared to be like, that's not what this is about. If you can't see that, that's disappointing. Maybe you should read some books about this, and then you would get a new perspective on why we need these books.
Are you guys preparing the bookstores and the owners? Are you giving them a clear, concise outline of the goals of this and what your intentions are, and maybe including, some responses that might come from the community and a guideline or on how to deal with that? I guess just making them aware that this is a possibility, because I think sometimes people say yes to things that this is a really great thing, but sometimes they forget what could come of it. So not as a fear tactic or to scare them, but just precautions.
That's definitely part of the mission, is making sure they're informed about what this project looks like and what this class is in reference to and why we're responding to things a certain way. And of course, preparing them hey, this is our mission, and there's been a history, even on our university, of people not boding well with certain people. So I think that having the intentional outline of here's what we want, here's why we want it, is a continuous conversation we want to have with these businesses, so we have a really clear idea that if something less than savory did happen, we were at least aware that it was a possibility, and not just leaving people in the dark until somebody says something really nasty about their store.
And our robot compatriot was the one who has had all of the contact with the bookstores. So have you kind of made those risks clear, or?
So I definitely made our, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, cool. So I definitely made our goals clear with them and the type of literature we were looking for, and all of them were very open to it and excited about it. I did not really even think about the point that people might get upset with the actual bookstore or the owners themselves, so that's definitely something I'll talk to them about. And I don't know, maybe our group will all sit down and come up with maybe some guidelines for how to deal with that, or something you suggested. Yeah.
I mean, a simple sort of one-sheet Q&A with talking points, I think, might be wise.
To go with the boxes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, to go to the owners,
Right.
so they are prepared to respond to questions.
Right.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we'll do that.
I was in addition to that, I wonder if it also like would be helpful to give them like a de-escalation strategy if that doesn't work. And I think like one thing I've done with the group in the past is we created an email address that was like generic, and so it didn't have names or anything. And then that way like the employee or the store owner could say like, if you want to talk more about this, like this is the email address you could send, and that way it's like taking some of the burden off of them. And also a lot of times when people are yelling, they just want to feel heard, right? So like gives them an outlet, and then it also gives you guys like space to figure out how you want to respond.
That makes me think it might also be an opportunity to, because I know when the representative from the Montana Human Rights Organization came by, she brought us literature about de-escalation, and I think that could be a great opportunity to circulate their literature also.
And plus, just having a generic email where people can email us is actually a really great idea in case people have questions who maybe they're not even upset about the project, they just want to know how long it's going. They can have an easy way to contact us about it.
You have your hand up.
It's covered.
That's something we could put on the flyer too, so it's very easily accessible.
Yes, I agree. Let's write it down.
All right, I have another devil's advocate to put out in front of me. So, someone comes up to you here on campus and says, that's just it's a waste of time. People don't read books anymore. They just look at their phones or they watch movies. Why aren't you having a movie drive? Haven't you heard? Movie drives are a thing, you know.
Movie drives are a thing, you know.
Is someone a little bitter?
Yeah, it sounds like a personal problem
No,
that this person has.
This is entirely reasonable.
Yes.
I think that's a discussion we could have, is having a multimedia drive. I think we're comfortable enough in our project to admit we haven't really discussed that or thought about it.
I think it would just, if we had it multimedia drive, I think that that's such a strange concept that, I mean, I just don't think it would, I think it would distract from things as opposed to focusing on things. I think if I met somebody like that, I'd probably encourage them to bring a movie to me that is academically useful and will add it to the books, just because I think that person's probably ridiculous, and sometimes you just gotta say yes and to those people, and then they get bored very quickly with you. If you're just like, yeah, totally, bring me all of the movies that you have about racial equality and justice. I'd love that. Because they won't have any.
I mean, just to answer the devil's advocate, you can always use the argument that you can easily download or stream a movie.
That's true.
For books, yeah, there's Kindle versions of a lot of books, but there's a lot of books that haven't been put into ebook versions or PDF versions. And so there's some material that people just can't get a hold of unless they have the actual physical book. Most movies are, you can either legally stream them or find other ways of getting them. So,
And also, to play devil's advocate even further, I would challenge the idea that there aren't films that are educational and reputable.
I think there are.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies is the movie Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
It's like quintessential.
There definitely are those kind of movies that are useful. I just think that somebody who's coming with that kind of complaint probably isn't going to be aware of such titles and is just saying it to be contrary and being like, oh, this is a waste of time because technology makes everything a waste of time now.
That was definitely not the argument, was that there's not multimedia that's related to this, just to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
I would just really refrain with the way, just in the example of the way that you responded, it felt very, not punitive, but just like, obviously I understand where you're coming from and the idea that, yeah, sure, a lot of those people are going to be contrary, but like, trying your hardest not to go into the assumption with that, because otherwise you might miss out on some really cool donations, or like make a lot of people feel like, oh, what the heck, why would I bring a book now? They were just so, like...
That's why I
awesome
said
about
my
it, yeah.
initial reaction would be like, yes, please bring me that movie that you want to donate. And if they are being just contrary, then they'll get mad at that. If they're being like genuine, then they'll be like, oh, cool, I will bring you that movie. And I'll be like, awesome, sounds good. Glad that you asked me.
You can even just make the argument too that not a lot of people have access to a DVD player anymore. And like having, like you could, because a lot of laptops now don't have a disk drive and things like that, or even TV necessarily. So instead of just being like, show me the multimedia, you know, I don't know, you could just instead maybe reframe it as books are possibly more accessible to the general public now, because not everybody has a laptop with a disk drive, not everybody has a DVD player, not everybody has access to Netflix, even though they are becoming more common, like there's not as many options for streaming things anymore, or you know, there's not as many to play DVDs.
And the other thing that was brought up earlier was that, you know, we are doing this on campus, and some people will be donating books that were used in other classes. So then students that maybe can't afford the textbooks every semester can go to the BSU and see if they can borrow the book for the semester or for however long they need it. And so in an academic setting, it is necessary to have books from most of your classes.
And piggybacking off that, I think that you could even use those books that you get from the book drive to contact professors, and like, or professors can contact BSU and say, I want to integrate this into my lesson plan. I'd like to find a book for it. And then they have this array of books that they can look through and then decide if it's something they want to use.
Exactly.
On the point of accessibility, should we include, should we explicitly say that we're also looking for the donation of audiobooks so that this library is accessible for everyone on campus? Or does that make it too complicated, do you think? Yes? Good? Or no?
I think it's too complicated. I think you should be doing it.
Okay, cool.
Oh, shaking my head. You could even make a note that, like, if you do have a multimedia thing, we're willing to consider it under certain circumstances.
Right. Okay.
It's known as a movie drive.
I've never heard of a movie drive. I've heard like multimedia where you can have like movies and books and TVs and audiobooks, but never specifically.
It's clearly a thing.
It's your own thing.
You can have a DVD drive.
Opposition to your book drive.
What's more popular? Let's find out once and for all.
Does anybody have anything else to add? I feel like we kind of addressed the last question, like risks we haven't really thought about yet.
Just one thing for risks that you kind of addressed but not completely. In terms of when the material is donated, based on my experience working at a place with a lot of books, and especially a lot of books that have what some people would consider controversial material, when the books are donated, make sure to actually check inside of the books as well. I know where I work, we've had a lot of issues, especially in the last couple months, where people will put white supremacist material inside of the book, so you don't initially notice it. You could just see it could be a book that's relevant to the topic, and nobody would notice that there was something inside of it until they opened it up. Yeah. So that's just something to kind of...
Yeah, that's been a repeated strategy here in the library. In the African
yeah, we have somebody whose
section.
sole job it is to go through those stacks and check every single book.
Because it's happened many, many times in the 10 years I've been here. We don't know who, but it's happened repeatedly.
So, I mean, I think we did touch on it, but I want to go more into specifics, like walking through the step-by-step process. How would you guys deal with having, let's say it's not a book, it's a flyer, it's white supremacist material, it's very hateful, it targets African American students, and it targets whatever. But we found it, it's in there, we've got it, it's been donated. What do we do from that moment on? I want to go into details.
I was actually curious in your presentation earlier because you said you wanted to use, if you got that literature, use it as a teaching moment. So I was wondering who you were going to teach and how. So it doesn't answer your question, it just maybe.
Yeah, the way we visualized that was using social media as a way to say this was something that was donated to a Black Student Union drive. This isn't okay. And to combat it, come down and donate books that say the opposite of this. But that's kind of why I'm asking the question, because I don't know if that's the best way to deal with it, and I'm looking for fresh ideas.
I can't remember the person who said this, it was one of our guest speakers, but they were talking about the choice between like whether to present something or not present something, and just thinking about like, is it good to reproduce that flyer on social media and say this is the thing we got, or is it better to say we received a hate message in our box, we don't want these messages.
In terms of actually representing the specific content.
Yes.
Versus just doing a more general reference.
Yeah.
I like the idea of a general reference better.
I think that's something we kind of touched on, is because we're working in tandem with BSU, that would be a conversation we have with them too, because those announcements are something that are happening under their name, and obviously we're new in working with that organization. It's completely up to them what we do and don't publicize, I think, just because it's under their name.
And that might be a conversation to have with Human Rights Network too, when we, if we get that type of literature.
Yeah, I had mentioned this earlier. I think depending on what it is and what you receive, I can see how it could be very situational, but would you guys ever consider the conversation with BSU if they were okay with it, like including the material as a form of like, this is what the enemy is thinking? Because on so many of our presentations, it was very helpful to see the mindset and the strategies behind white supremacists and looking at the material that they used. Like for example, who was the one that came in and talked about his trips to the Aryan nations?
Ron Walsh.
Yeah, so he had so many examples and descriptions of different forms of like publications and like kind of propaganda and posters that they use. And I feel like sometimes that can be very helpful in identifying things. So I don't know if you guys had considered potentially using that to your advantage within the library. Obviously BSU would have to like
It might be useful to have a reference of literature that's been passed around specifically at U of M, because then if literature pops up in the future, then you have a reference to go back to and say, has this kind of thing been spread before on campus? And then you're a step closer to being able to find out who did it, why they did it, if they have a more general, broad campaign. I think it's definitely a conversation that we should have with the BSU. It could be a useful resource, and also it could give people like a second step if they do find that kind of material on campus, instead of just being like, this sucks, I hate that I found this. They can go and take it someplace and talk to people about, I'm upset that I found this. Is there anything else that's like this? Can I have a nice book now? Or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation to have for sure.
Or maybe not even making it public, because I see there like could be concern it could be a double-edged sword of it then turning into a resource for white supremacists. But like cataloging it in a more private collection so that we can catalog like explicit acts of white supremacy like on the campus and around the area.
I think it could be useful, yeah.
I mean, maybe if you keep it, maybe not necessarily give it to the BSU to keep within their library, because I just said it could be used as a resource for white supremacists, but maybe donate it to the Mansfield Library, because we do keep terribly enough a significant amount of that type of material within the library, but it's cataloged in a certain way.
Yeah.
So you guys keep it, and where does it go after that?
Well, I know like in terms of hate notes and all that, we keep it in a cabinet in the back. But we do have, because sometimes books will get mixed in with like the books like within the collection itself that have been placed there, and that I think we give it up to archives and special collections, and they keep it up there for not for general student usage, but for like academic use.
I think that'd be a really good alternative, yeah.
You've been trying to.
Yeah, I just think that just having it in the BSU library could be very dangerous, just because not only could somebody go in there looking for a good book and then accidentally grab that and get triggered by it, or like if somebody goes in there knowing that we have that there and going to use that to maybe make another copy of it or take it as an example to continue to spread those messages. So just having it out and just having them as examples, as I see the beneficial side to it, but at the same time I just think that there's a really high risk with that. So I think presenting it in a very specific way, if we are going to have it available to the public, making sure that it's presented to the point where someone who is hateful could not use it and copy it and spread it. And I think maybe giving it to the Mansfield Library and them keeping it in a safe spot where not everybody and anybody can have access to it would be a good way to kind of combat that.
For sure. Yeah.
So have we talked about the idea of the pornography of violence in this class?
Yeah, not in this class, but no.
So I mean, I think that obtains to what you're discussing. So the idea of the pornography of violence, it applies to discussions of photographs of lynching. It applies to the kind of hate literature we're referencing here. And the issue is that while documentation is essential, you want to document it, you want to have a record of what happened, you very easily slip into the pornography of violence because people, it's part of the human condition, it seems to be really interested in that display of this kind of hate, the kind of violence of lynching for the images themselves. I think you used the phrase prurient interest earlier. Good job, Jess. That's a great phrase. But that absolutely obtains in that we may want to put it out there because we say, look what happened. But what ends up is that we increase the gaze and we increase the exposure to those images. And so I'm convinced by the arguments that we only want to put those kind of images out there in very select, very limited, very controlled circumstances, because otherwise we end up becoming unintentional pornographers in the process. And that's not something we want to do if we're interested truly in undermining white supremacy.
Yeah. I didn't know that the Mansfield had that archiving system. I think that would be the best option for us.
Yeah, we don't keep, based on what...
Specifically what happens for the folder.
Yeah, I know that we hold on to the things that we get in the library mostly for like referential purposes, so that when it comes through again, we kind of know what we're looking for. We also keep it for UMPD. Some of it immediately gets handed over to UMPD depending on how bad it is, but that is an option. I don't know who you would talk to.
I have a contact in archives that I've worked with before for that room, so I can
perfect. Perfect.
Also, I think this came up, it did come up earlier, but the Montana Human Rights Network does trace those things, and it might, it would be a good thing for them to see, because that's their job.
Yeah. I think the main thing, though, is that this project is very collaborative, and so when those things come up, it's not going to be just our decision, or it's not going to be something that we decide, just with us four. And so it is going to be very inclusive and collaborative.
Okay.
Anything else?
All right, let's turn off the recording.